What are the exam topics about this particular certification? So earlier there were 6 modules, now there are only 3 modules. They consolidated, there are not much changes, just few services were there which is out of scope now, and they just realigned the sections, they consolidated, and now there are only 3 sections. First section is fully about the concept, either it is related to Microsoft Azure or cloud computing. Next is about the Azure architecture, how it is globally spread, like geography, region pairs, and availability zones, regions, how they are connected, and the core services. So this module is very very important because it carries around 35 to 40% of your exam. And here we will talk about all the services related to compute, storage, network. Those are the core services. Then we have some additional services like databases, we have IAM services related to the security, and we have some advanced services like artificial intelligence and machine learning. Let's move to the third section, that is about the Azure management, how Azure we can Azure manage our infrastructure in Azure through the subscriptions, through the management groups, and there are some services related to the security compliance and all that. All things will be covered under.
High availability. If I define high availability in a single line, that means that high availability is the ability to keep your service up and running for longer period of time, means with very little downtime. As when we run our application, we always want that our application should run 100%. That means we always want our application or services to be up and running all the time. But in the ideal scenario, we want it, but it's not at all possible for any of the service provider or not for us as well. So we expect there is a time when we will get some disruption. So because of that, our services can go down. Even if you heard about recently about the Google services, their services were down for 30 minutes or so, and they had a huge loss of in billions. So that's what I'm trying to say. So how Azure help us in terms of high availability. So Azure help us to make our application or the service available, highly available through the availability zones. So availability zones come into picture, and it will have the, as per SLA, 99.99%. So you can expect there it is close to 100%. No cloud provider give SLA 100%, but the thing is they have some varies from 99 to 99.99%. In some cases less also, but not more than that. So they provide in the SLA that they will keep your application and services up and running. That means they will provide high availability through the availability zone, which is having around 99.99% of uptime. Okay, so what are the factors which reduce the chances of the availability? So normally it can be your network outage, it can be your application as well, failure of the application. It can be from the system side, your system can be down where our application is hosted. There might be some power outage, and there might be some problem with the nature disaster, we can say. So there are many factors, other factor also, hardware issue or the software issue or licensing issue. There is see, so there are many factors. Because of that, this our services can go down, but still because we have many factors, still they are giving uptime of 99.99% as per SLA. So this is what we have in the high availability. Let's talk about the scalability, elasticity, and agility in all together. If I'll talk about the scalability, that is the ability to increase or decrease resources for any given workload. Means it can be like we have scaling in two ways, like scaling up and down, and scaling out or scaling in. What does that mean? I'll explain you later. So scaling means to add or remove the resources, okay, on the system itself. Either you are increasing the number of the server or you are increasing the configuration of this server. That comes under scaling. Then what exactly the elasticity is? Elasticity is the ability to automatically or dynamically increase or decrease resources as needed. That means it can stretch and it can shrink as well. So we can add it or remove it. That is the feature comes under elasticity. So cloud provides this feature as well. When we are talking about the agility, that is the ability to respond to change rapidly. That means whenever we need to make such changes like scaling up or down or scaling out in, that response is very quick. In that is provided by the cloud provider. In auto scaling, it's you will not realize at all also sometimes. So so that is the just the ability to respond to the changes rapidly. That is the agility. Now we will talk about the scalability. There are two way: horizontal, and then another we have vertical. If we will talk about the horizontal, there are two way: scale in, scale out. If we will talk about the vertical one, scale up, scale down. Scale in is we are increasing the adding the servers in the same system if needed as per the load. If the load is increased. Scale out, that means we are removing the resources from the existing system. Like if we have the load balancer, they are running on 4 nodes. If the load is increased for the application and the services, we will add those, add one more server in that one. If we don't require that one, we can remove that as well. So it is scale in or scale out. What exactly the scale up or down means, that on the single resource, if it is having like 2 CPU, 4 GB of RAM, okay, uh, if our system is slow, if we want to increase the resources, okay, we want to make it 2 to 4 CPU, okay, that is known as a scale up. Similarly, if we will increase the RAM, that will also come under scale up. When we will reduce these configuration, like from 4 CPU to 2 CPU, then it is scale down. Similarly, 4 GB to 2 GB, it is scale down. So this is what, when we will talk about the vertical, that means that we are working on a same system. Either we are increasing or we are reducing. If we will go with scale in or scale out, that means we are adding or we are removing the resources. So this is what we have in scaling, elasticity, and agility. Let's talk about next topic, that is fault tolerance or the disaster recovery. Let's talk in a single line, then we will explain it. Fault tolerance is the ability to remain up and running even in the event of a component no longer functioning. Suppose if you are running a load balancer, okay, that is your LB, and it is having 2 vacant server, okay. So what happens, sometimes your service is running on this particular node and something happened with this one and it got down. So what it will do, it will add one more resources, or it will move the services which is running on this particular node to this one. So you will have the, we can say, the small failure or small scale level failure. Means it is not fully down, your system is not fully down, just some component of your system got down. Because of that, your load balancer moved the services from one unhealthy resource to the healthy resource. So this is known as a fault tolerance, okay. In this way we can say our system is fault tolerant. What is disaster recovery? See, disaster recovery is the ability to deal with the failure at a larger scale. That means if you, in case, for an example, there is natural disaster come to any region, any location it comes. So what will happen? It can impact your whole data center. That means whole availability zone as well as whole region also can be impacted. What are those natural disaster, like floods or earthquake? We can have the example of that one. In that case, what happened? So disaster recovery plan, which is also known as business continuity and disaster recovery. See, if we have the organization that is big and we are providing services to many clients, we can't afford that our server, our application or the services go down. In that case, there might be a disruption. In this case, what we will have the backup site ready with that one. If suppose we have region 1 and region 2, if something happened with this one, natural disaster came on this particular region and all the services go down, so it is having the backup site ready, just it will replicate or transfer the role to the another region. This is what we do in disaster recovery. So I hope it is fine with you. So next topic we have capex and opex. So if we will talk about the capex is the upfront spending of money on the physical infrastructure, or we can say if you are building your own organization, you need to spend amount to purchase the hardware, to get the components ready, then you will hire the team and all. So for that one, you need a capital expenditure, right? Once you have everything ready, then you will move to the operational model. Like you need power to run your business every day, you need the human resources to work for you. So when you work for your own organization, the capex and opex both come into picture. So capital expenditure is the upfront spending to build our organization, or we can say build our infrastructure. What is the operational expenditure? It is the spending money on the services or product now. Means there is no upfront cost to be spent. That means that when you need to run any service, you just pay and use that particular service. So the thing is here, if you have a car, if you purchase the car, that is the capex, and if you are renting the car, that comes under opex. Okay, so that is the difference. If we will talk about the capex, what comes into that, like server cost, storage cost, network cost, and the for organization continuity and disaster recovery cost, means if we will prepare another site for our backup. Next, if we will talk about the operational cost, that's like software licensing that we need to renew, hosting expenses, electricity bill, real estate rentals and all comes into opex. So this is the difference. Here we will spend upfront, here we don't need to spend upfront, but we need to spend regularly or as per the services we use it. So the next topic we have economics benefit of the cloud. So I defined it in two way, like economic of scale. Economies of scale is the ability to reduce cost and gain efficiency when operating at a larger scale in comparison to operating at a small scale. The example of this one, if you know, like the cloud provider, how they can give these resources what we are getting as a service at the cheaper cost. When we will go alone, like for our on-prem infrastructure, we get the same service at a higher cost. The reason is they go with a larger scale. They purchase the hardware, they build the big data centers. So what they can do, they make their own infrastructure big, and then they share their infrastructure with us. So that's why they are just sharing. When they will go with a larger scale, they will get big discount on that one, so they will get at the cheaper price. If we will go for us individually, then we will get the same hardware at the higher cost, because we will purchase the limited amount, right? So that is the economies of scale. So whenever they will ask, they can ask in the question, what are the benefits of the cloud? In that one I found this option, that's why I explain it here. Next is consumption based model. What exactly it is? It's allow end users only to pay for the resources that they use it. So here, that's why we move to the cloud there here, because here we just need to pay for what we are using. We no need to spend extra on that one, right? So that's why it's a consumption based model. Cloud is also known as consumption based model. So what is the benefit with doing this consumption based model? That we no need to spend anything upfront. We no need to purchase or manage the costly infrastructure. We just need to pay for the additional resource whenever we need to do add it, right? Whenever we need it, or we can stop paying the for the resources which is no longer required. But in our on-prem infrastructure, we need to follow all the decommission process and all. But here we no need to think about that one, that what we will do after the decommissioning of that hardware server and all. Here we don't no need it, we just allowed remove services. Let's talk about quickly. So first we have the shared responsibility model. As the cloud works on shared responsibility model. That means that if we will go with our own infrastructure, okay, that on-prem environment, what we do, we require to build an infrastructure like storage, network, compute, virtual machine, operating system, runtime, application, data, and access. So in this case, we need to manage everything. We need the resources who will manage these all things. But when we move to the cloud, we are offered infrastructure in three ways. First is known as infrastructure as a service. Second is platform as a service. Third is software as a service. If we will talk about infrastructure as a service, in that one, what they do, they provide this infrastructure. If you know that any infrastructure which need to up and running, it consists three things. One is the compute, where your application will run. You need the storage, where your data will be stored. You need the networking, which connect these two things. So this is the whole idea. Mainly three components comes under compute. So these all three things will be provided to you as a service, and cloud provider will manage. All the blue part will be managed by the cloud provider. You just need to manage the other things, like you need to create the virtual machine, you need to install the operating system of your choice, then you can create the runtime environment for the developers, and you can build the application on that one. So this is what we have in infrastructure as a service. When we will talk about the platform as a service, that means they are providing platform as a service. That means the runtime environment and all, everything they will manage for you. You just need to develop your focus only on developing your application. And so what it happened, so our means so much effort where we are putting to create these all things is reduced. So that is reduced, so we can focus more on developing our application, make it more efficiently. So here the blue part is managed by cloud provider. We just need to manage the application and the data which is related to our application. When we move to software as a service, software as a service, the best example of this is like you are using any mail service like Gmail or anything, like Office 365. These all comes under software as a service. What happens, you will just need a license to run that particular software, or we can say to use that particular service, and you will pay only for your license. So this is the cheapest way, and it is very quickly. You just go request for it, you will get it, and you will be able to manage your thing. You just need to take care about the data what you are putting in your application, or we can say the account, like in your Gmail account, what kind of data you should have, and who will have the access, to whom you are sharing the passwords and all. That's related to data and access. So that you need to manage. But everything really, up to application, cloud provider need to manage these all. So this is the shared responsibility model. So as I mentioned that in service model, we have infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and the software as a service. We have already talked about it in detail. So if we will talk about in pictorial form, so this everything makes your own infrastructure. But in cloud, we can partially get it from the cloud provider. Suppose you just need to if you will go with the infrastructure as a service model, this the responsibility of cloud provider to manage the physical data center, like building where it should be, the to purchasing of that land or the renting out of that land, then on that one building the network components and all, building the servers and all, it's the responsibility of the cloud provider. We just need to focus on these three parts: operating systems or runtime environment and all, and the application and its data. When we move to the platform as a service, as I mentioned, we will get everything from the cloud till the runtime environment. Means the platform we will get, we just need to develop our application, and we need to focus on the data and who will have the access on that one. And software as a service, we just need to focus on the data and the access part. Everything we will get it from the cloud provider. So if we will talk about, let's compare these services in terms of ownership, that means the control. As you know that here in the software as a service, cloud service provider manages many things. That means you just have the access on the data part and the access part. That means you have very less control on this one, and you have very less ownership on the infrastructure side. If we will talk about the cost part, here the cost will be the lowest one, because in the question they will ask like that, that which is having the low cost, which where you have the great ownership or high control kind of question you will get it. Similarly, if you will go with the IaaS, you will have more ownership, you will have more control, and the cost will be higher on this one. So this is what we have in service time. Next topic is the serverless computing. Just think in a way, do you think that any application can run without a server? The answer is no, right? Then why they are mentioning like serverless computing, you can run your application on the serverless computing? What exactly that means? See, in the cloud provider, what they will do, the example of this one is Azure Function and the logic apps. So what they want to tell with this serverless, you just prepare your application, you keep your function or the code ready, you just use that code on our server. We will not charge on that for that particular server. So we are no need to worry about the server part. Means we are not worried about the underlying infrastructure. We just need to run our code or the function. So how they will charge in this model? They will charge how many times your function is executed, number of times. This is the question I got it when I appeared for the exam. And how many number of times this function is executed, how much length of the means the time by the length of the running code. So these are the two parameters where they charge for your serverless computing. So serverless doesn't mean that there is no servers required. The only thing, you will not be charged for that one, and you don't need to worry about the underlying infrastructure. You just need to provide function or the code to them when the requirement to execute that particular code will come. It will be run at that particular time by the cloud provider. So it is managed by the third party, we can say. So what exactly the cloud computing is? Cloud computing is the delivery of computing services over the internet. So there are a few parameters by which we can define it is a cloud, like broad network access, on-demand service, and all the services are available through the internet. We are just getting the services. Okay. So what is the benefit of the cloud computing? It is cost effective. It is scalable whenever we want. It is elastic. It can stretch, means shrink or stretch anytime. It is more reliable because they have the huge expert team there who will take care of all the infrastructure and all. It is available globally. That means you can access the services from anywhere from the world. Just you require the internet connection and the web browser. And it is secure because they take care of all the compliance with their infrastructure. So on the basis of deployment model, we have three kind of cloud: private, public, and hybrid. Private means it's owned by single party. Single party means if it is your for, it's similar to on-prem infrastructure, we can say, but it doesn't mean that you only need to own it. Might be you are owning that particular cloud, but it is managed by the third party for you. So that is also come under private cloud. When we are talking about the public cloud, it is the example of cloud service provider, where you are not the only one who is using the resources, but also others are using those resources. Hybrid cloud is the combination of public cloud and private cloud, or we can say your organization and the cloud service provider. So this is what we have in these three clouds. So let's talk about the comparison. If we will talk about the private cloud, it is a bit cheaper for us. Means private cloud is having the high cost, public cloud is having the low cost. Similarly, if we will talk about the private cloud, we will have the great more control or more ownership for that one. So here we have the high ownership, here we have low ownership, because we don't manage that thing. So the question can be asked like this: which model or the which deployment had a great degree of ownership and control? When their degree of ownership and control, private is having more and it is having less. Either they can ask like highest or least, kind of. It can be asked in any way. This is what we had in comparing of deployment model. First, let's start with the region. If we will talk in one liner, what is the region? Region is a geographical area on the planet that is having at least one data center. That data center is known as availability zone. Okay, so that is the things, and then we will talk about the geographies. Geography is typically contain two or more regions. See, we can have, like, if we will talk about geographies in general, which is like America, Europe, Asia Pacific, Middle East, Africa. These are known as a geographies in Azure, and the geography typically contains two or more regions. Okay, so if we will talk about the Asia Pacific, like, then they can have like Asia 1A, 1B, 1C, like this one. So we can have two or more regions inside the geographies. So geographies contains the region pairs that we know, that is the like 1A and 1B. Like these are the regions, separate regions, and when we it comes together, it's known as region pairs, and it will be inside the geographies. So geography here will be Asia. So this is just for an example, just to understand these things. When we will talk about the region pairs, okay, so region pairs is paired with another region. One region is paired with another region which is having at least 300 miles away. Okay, that is the common distance we talk in the cloud technology when we talk about the two different regions within the same geography. So those work together. So let's talk about next concept, that is availability zone. As we already discussed, that if we have one particular region that can have multiple availability zone. So what availability zone help us? So it's help us in providing high availability, okay, that protects our application and the data from our, if any data center get failed. So logically a data center, that physical data center is known as availability zone. But in this particular availability zone, that is made up of update domains and the fault domains, and it provides 99.95% of SLA because of this. So how these are distinguished between each other, right? So it can be AZ1, AZ2, AZ3. See, sometimes we can have the failure. Okay, so one AZ is not available, then the services which is running on this one can move to this one. Sometimes we have the plant maintenance as well, if they are upgrading something or patching their components. Okay, so in that case also it helps us. So we will get normal such kind of scenario in question, like if what help us, which component help us in Azure if any data centers get failed. So in that case, this availability zone help us in that case. Let's talk about next concept, that is the resource group. A resource group is like a container that holds related resources for Azure solution. See, you can have multi type of services or the component in your Azure, right? You have some networking component, you can have some storage component, you can have the VMs. Okay, so either you can keep the same kind of resources like RG1 in this one, storage resources in RG2 or RG3, or also you can create the resource group in terms of your department wise. Suppose one department is using one component of this, one component of this, that can also have some means grouping of logical grouping, we can say here. Okay, so how it helps us? Okay, so in the resource group we can move Azure resources one subscription to another subscription as well. As you know, when you create any resources, you have the Azure account. Okay, Azure account can have one or multiple subscription, one or many, and these resources can move from one subscription to another subscription as well. And one more thing, if you provide any kind of permission on your resource group, okay, that will automatically inherit to the Azure resources as well. Also you can get the questions like, if you delete resource group, will the resources inside those resource group will be deleted? Yes, that is true. If you will remove it, then the resources inside that one can be deleted, will be deleted. To protect your resources from the resource group, we can enable locks here, like delete lock is there, read only lock is there. So there are multiple locks are there to prevent such accidental deletion. Now let's talk about the subscription. The Azure account is a global unique entity that gets you access to the Azure services, also to the Azure subscription. So we can have one account. What it will help us, it we can have the access to the services, also we can have the access to the subscriptions. Okay, it can have one or many. Similarly, we can have multiple services as well. So what subscription help us? Okay, so as I already mentioned that we can create multiple subscription within under one Azure account. Also, we can get an Azure subscription automatically when we sign up for Azure or any resources we create inside our subscription. Okay, subscription also help us wherever we want to have some logical grouping of Azure resources. So it will help us in billing purpose as well. Okay, so we can understand, okay, my service resources belongs to this particular subscription. What amount we need to pay, or we can predict the amount on the basis of the services within that particular subscription. So it can help us for uh, billing as well. Let's talk about next concept. It's a management group. So management group allow us to organize our subscriptions and apply governance control such as Azure policy, role based access control to the management group. So it's normally for management purpose we use it, where we can easily apply the Azure policy or the role based access controls. Similarly, whatever resources, okay, all the management groups with, see, we can have one subscription, right? Inside that subscription, we can have multiple managed groups as well. So whatever permission we apply here, it will automatically inherit on the management groups as well. So it doesn't matter that if we have an enterprise agreement or certified solution partner, or we are using the services like pay as you go model. Any type of subscription we can have. So this service gives us all Azure customers enterprise grade management. Okay, so it's not depend on the subscription type. So we will get similar functionality under each type of agreement. Let's talk about the very important concept, that is Azure Resource Manager. Okay, so as the terms define that it's used for the management of the Azure resources. So let's talk about the definition. Azure Resource Management is the deployment and management service for Azure. It provides a management layer that enables us to create, update, and delete resources in our Azure account. As you know that we use management feature like ACL access controls or the logs or tags, right, to secure and organize our resources after the deployment. So whenever any user sends a request from any of the Azure tools or API or SDKs, resource manager receives the request, and then it will help us to authenticate and authorize as well that particular request. So suppose you have one Azure Resource Manager. Okay, see your how you can request the resources. You can request the resources through the console, or we can say the portal. We can request through the PowerShells, and there are other methods like CLI or the APIs. So these are few methods by which we can request the resources. So what this ARM do? It authenticate, authenticate, and then also it will authorize. Suppose you are looking for storage. Okay, there is some data store you have, your user. Okay, this is the user, this is trying to access this particular resource through this one. So this ARM will help you to authenticate this user. Also it will help us to authorize. Authorization, as you know, it will check if this particular user is having access to this one. So ARM can help us in that way as well. Either this resource can be anything, either it is storage or the virtual machine or the web application, whatever it is, but ARM help us to authenticate and authorize those requests. So it's a kind of a management layer, and it helps us to create, update, or delete resources in your Azure account as mentioned in the definition. Now this is the last term of this particular section, that is Azure resources that are manageable items that's available through Azure. Okay, so these resources are like virtual machine, storage account, web application, databases, virtual networks. These all the services which we are seeing inside the Azure is known as Azure resources. So this is what we have in first section. Let's talk about the next section of this particular domain, where we will talk about core resources available in Azure. So if we will talk about here, we will talk about the compute, network, storage, database, and Azure Marketplace. So let's go through them each and every services one by one. First, we have the virtual machine. Okay, so as you all know about the virtual machine, what exactly it is like virtually hosted on a physical host, that particular computing machine. So in other term, if we will go with the definition, then a virtual machine is a software based computer that's run on physical computer. Okay, and this physical computer is known as host, and it provides the underlying physical components such as disk space. See, whatever this virtual machine required, either it is storage or the network. See, this is just a software based computer, but it will use your host. Okay, this is your physical host. On that there is some virtualization layer, hypervisor layer is there. What this hypervisor layer do, it will abstract this host. Okay, abstraction is just to divide or split this particular host and will create VMs on that one virtual machine. So this is what we have, and it is based on we can't give the resources more than this particular host. That's keep in mind. So on this particular VM we can install our required OS, then we can install and configure our application top of that particular operating system. So this is the normal architecture of virtual machine, how it is related with the host, who divide us, who help us to create the virtual machine, that is hypervisor. We in VMware case we have the ESXi. If we will talk about the Microsoft, here we have the Hyper-V. Let's talk about next service, that is Azure App Service. Azure App Service is PaaS. Yes, if we will talk about the virtual machine, this is known as infrastructure as a service. Okay, here we have the Azure App Service, that is the PaaS, that is platform as a service offering in Azure, that is help us for hosting the websites. Okay, so also in addition to basic web hosting services, App Service also offers many additional features. Okay, so we can easily add to our web application. Also, we can flip off a switch within the Azure portal. So whenever we create a web application in Azure App Service, your app run on Azure virtual machine. So whenever whenever where we can run our application, you know that for that we require some operating system on which we can host it. So how it is configured? You have the underlying host. Okay, on top of that there is hypervisor, like I showed you in previous slide. Then we have the virtual machine. On this one there is OS. After that you can you configure your app service here. As you know, this is managed by the cloud service provider in case of platform as a service. Okay, and this one you need to manage. Next we have Azure Container Instances. Okay, in short we known as ACI. Azure Container Instances is a PaaS offering that offers the ability to run a containerized application easily. See, we have understood how the application run on virtual machine. Let's understand how containers works. See, container is a standard package in which we have the required file from the operating system and also the application's required library. So that can run your application independently. So what your container is having, let's understand what is container. Okay, container is having required operating system files and the library for your application. So whenever we initiate this container, your application will run independently. So how this container is run in normal environment? See, you have the host operating system. Okay, sorry, host, that is the physical server you are having. In virtualization, what we use hypervisor, right? Similarly here we use hypervisor, but here we have the option that we can run directly container runtime engine, that is known as CRE. We can directly run this container runtime. You have heard about the Docker for that one, so it helps us. That is container runtime, which help us to initiate the containers and run the containers. So we can run this container runtime directly on host as well. Also, we can install the operating system on that one. On top of that, we can run this container runtime. So what it do here, what we can have, we can run the container here. Suppose container 1, C1. Similarly, we have C2. So if we will talk about the virtual machine, what it do, this virtual machine is splitted the host. Okay, suppose if you have a host of 2 CPU and 4 GB of RAM, okay, then you can create 2 virtual machine of 1 CPU and 2 GB of RAM, not more than that, right? Similarly, what happens here in virtual machine, we are splitting or abstracting the host. Okay, here what the container do, it abstract the operating system. Okay, so it abstract the operating system. So it's independent run on this particular host. So container is OS abstraction. So if you want to learn more about the container, I have a video in my playlist under the containers or the Kubernetes or Docker. You can go through them to understand more detail about the container. But just to understand that in the VM case, it is hardware abstraction or the host abstraction is there. Here where this particular container abstract the operating system, so it has the full host there. So we have full resources. This particular container can utilize whole resources of the host. Similarly, this container can also use the all resources of your host. But in virtual machine we can't do that one because it's already splitted the host there. Let's talk about next thing, that is Azure Kubernetes services. As we know, Kubernetes is a orchestration service for the containers, right? So let's understand. So AKS, that is Azure Kubernetes service, offers serverless Kubernetes, which is an integrated continuous integration or continuous delivery. Okay, CI/CD pipeline experience and enterprise grade security and governance. Also, it's a high available, secure and fully managed Kubernetes service. Okay, so what it actually do it manages or orchestrate the containers. Okay, so normally in Kubernetes cluster we have two kinds of node, like one is master, then we have the worker node. Okay, so master node is used for management purpose, or it is having multiple components inside that. When we have the key store database there, we have the engine there, we have the controller there, everything, the management component reside inside this one. Inside worker nodes we have the pods. Okay, inside that pods our containers run. So similarly in we can have multiple worker nodes. Similarly we can have multiple master node, but at a time one will be active to manage the things for these containers. Now our target is always to run our application on those applications can be run on your virtual machine, your physical server or the container. So this is like we have some cluster or load balancer, right? Similarly we have for to manage containers we have the Kubernetes services. I'll talk about the Kubernetes in details in my upcoming videos, but for the timing, just understand that Kubernetes has two kinds of nodes. One is master node, then we have worker nodes. On the worker nodes, actually the application runs inside the container. On the master node, only the management related components work. We can have the scenario where we have only one node. On that one, we can have the master and worker node together. Everything can run on that one. But in ideal scenario, or we can say the best practices, we use different nodes for that one. One is for admin purpose, or we can say the management purpose, and this one is for executing or running our run application. Okay, so this is version this is about the Azure Kubernetes services. Let's talk about next service. This is that is Windows Virtual Desktop. So Windows Virtual Desktop is a desktop and app virtualization service that's run on the cloud. So right now you know that many organizations offering work from home, okay, and they want that their employees should have same kind of configuration for their machine. Also, they don't want that your physical machine should have the required application and all. For that one, they use Windows Virtual Desktop. So that can be used as a sharing basis as well. Similarly, also you can have your own virtual desktop. It's easy to create and easy to delete as well, means the decommission. So management of these things are very easy. Also, it's cost effective, like we don't require multiple licenses for your operating system and all. But when you go with a separate machine, means the physical computer or the laptop, you require the separate licensing. So there is the cheapest cost for this one, so it's more cost effective as well. So this is not very much important in on this particular exam, but just understand it's like a virtual desktop. We can run multiple desktop inside one desktop, right? So that is the Windows Virtual Desktop. Now very important part, that is the networking component we will talk about. First we will start with the Azure Virtual Network. In this one in Azure we know as VNet, in AWS like VPC, Virtual Private Cloud. Similarly we have virtual network. So what virtual network do? It's allow Azure services to communicate with each other and also to the host or the devices to the internet. See, you have your Azure here, Azure resources here. Inside that one you have the virtual network. You can have other virtual network as well. Inside one region also you can have multiple. So what it do? Virtual network help us to communicate your resources with each other. Okay, Also, if you have the resources or machine over the internet, it can also help to communicate with these one. It can be internet, and also you can have your on-prem infrastructure. So network always help to communicate two devices where so in this case, wherever your devices are, these virtual network will help you to communicate with each other. Now let's talk about the Azure VPN. Azure Virtual Network offers the ability to communicate to your on-prem network using virtual private network connection, and many customers use this method to connect on-premises resources to Azure. See, you are having your on-prem infrastructure, right? Your organization infrastructure. Now you want to use the Azure resources. So you can, how you can communicate, you can set up a VPN here, and you can, through the VPN gateway, obviously one gateway is required to have connection between two kinds of setup. So in this case, we use VPN, that is Azure VPN, and but there is some limitation here. What happens, your connection is going through the internet. Just understand this thing, because it is very much required in case of exam. So in VPN case, our data or the traffic travels through the internet, but it's secure. It's there is a tunnel between this one. The data is secure, but the thing is it travels through the internet. Second thing, we can have maximum 1.25 Gbps speed here. That is the maximum speed we can get it for our traffic travel, data travel. Now let's talk about next component, that is express route. See, in express route, what is happening? It is used to create private connection between Azure data center and infrastructure, or your on your premises or in a co-location environment. Just understand, like previous example, we have the on-prem, then we have the Azure. Okay, now you want to connect this particular services, right? Azure to your on-prem. So in this case, if you want high speed, just understand these words, high speed connection, similarly what we have in our LAN connection, right? Similar of it. So it's like extending our infrastructure. So you will have a dedicated connection here, so it will be higher speed, and it can have up to 10 Gbps. Okay, so the connection what here we are getting, it's a dedicated fiber optics connection. Fiber optics connection. Also, as it's extended our network or the infrastructure or environment to Azure, now we will have the high speed, that is up to 10 Gbps. We have the dedicated fiber optics. So it's here the thing is, our data will not travel through the internet. So that's important in terms of exam. So in this case, our data don't travel through the internet, so there is no internet connection there come into picture. If we will talk about the pricing wise, there is no upfront cost, there is no termination cost, also pay only for what we use it. So in general, how this connection works, see, you have your on-prem infrastructure. Okay, here we have the Azure, but how the do you think that this connection is directly like fiber optics? No, there is something like service provider is there. Okay, also we have some MSEE, that is Microsoft Enterprise Edge router. Okay, so first our connection will build through here, and here to here our data travels like this way. Similarly, when we get back the request, it will go in this way. So this is what we have in express route. Let's talk about one more thing, that is VPN gateway. See, a VPN gateway is a specific type of virtual network gateway that is used to send encrypted traffic between an Azure virtual network and on-prem location over the public internet. Like it's like VPN. So when the question will come like, which gateway will be used when you connect your on-prem infrastructure to the Azure, where data travels through the internet, your traffic travels through the internet. In this case, we will use VPN gateway. Whenever it says the data or traffic should not travel through the internet, we will use express route gateway. Now we will talk about the virtual network peering. So what is the network virtual peering? See, we can have, okay, it is, we have one region. Okay, inside that region we have VPN1, sorry, VNet1, virtual private network 1, virtual network 2. We have two different networks. So there, to communicate between, see, this is logically separated, but when you need to connect these devices with each other, we require some kind of peering. So once we have set up a peering, then our data travels very quickly. It's like extending our network to the different networks, so it will be much similarly. So we have two types of peering. One is virtual network peering, that's normally connects network between the same Azure region. So this is, we have the region, we have two virtual network here. Whenever we suppose we have one more region, that is region 2. Now we want to communicate this particular device, that is VNet 3, to this one. In this one, whatever peering is known as, that is global virtual network peering. So this is what we have in virtual network peering. So now we understood what actually the network peering is, what is local, and what is global network peering. So there are some benefits as well. When we do this peering, we can have the connection like low latency connection. It's a high bandwidth connection between the resources between two virtual networks. Let's talk about next service, that is container blob storage. Okay, so the thing is, Azure Blob Storage is designed for storing unstructured data. So unstructured data means there is no definition, schema definition is there, and this data can be anything like text, images, graphs, and videos. So these type of data comes under unstructured data. So it is known as blob storage. So blob storage is designed for storing unstructured data, that we understood, and this data can be anything, and the entity stored in this particular blob storage is referred as a blob. So whatever data you are putting like text, image, video, document, anything, that will be referred as a blob. So we can have three kinds of blob storage. One is blob, that means it is used to store files used as an application. We have understood what is blob is. If we will talk about the append blobs are the specialized for append operation. For that reason, we are often used to store constantly updated data like diagnostic logs, like logs generated again and again, right? That kind of data is known as where we will store it, that is known as append blob. Next, we have the page blob. So it is mainly used to store virtual hard disk files that are used in virtual machines. So it is used for virtual machines hard disk, like VHDs we can say. It is used for logs and all, and it's like general documents and all, text, doc, and so we have block, append, and page block. Next storage is a disk storage. It's if we will talk about disk storage in Azure, that refers to a disk that are used in virtual machines. See, whenever we create one VM, right, there is automatically one storage or hard disk is assigned to this one, where our operating systems and all installed, right? So whenever we create virtual machine, Azure creates a disk that is automatically designed for temporary storage when you create a VM. Okay, that means that the data which is having on this particular disk will be lost if there is a maintenance event on this particular VM. Also, if we need to store data for a longer period of time that will persist between VM deployment and maintenance event, we use a disk using an image stored in Azure storage. So for that purpose, we use Azure storage. So Azure disks are available as both, like these disk storage can be both kind of, we can have the hard drive disk, and we can have solid drive disk, that is SSD. So if we want high speed transaction and all, we use SSD, and HDD is known as for low speed comparatively, because it's a magnetic disk, it's a solid disk. Next storage, we have the Azure files. In simple term, we can use Azure file storage as a drive from which to share files. Okay, see, whenever we require just to mapping, okay, so we can use this Azure files to map a drive, like you are running a virtual machine or any physical component here on your on-prem infrastructure. Okay, there is your virtual machine, for example, you want to add storage. Okay, so without maintaining anything, what you can do, you can just use this Azure storage from Azure, and you can use that particular storage here, just like mapping a drive. So that is known as Azure file storage. So Azure files here are backed by Azure storage. So we need a storage account to create an Azure file. So whenever we need to create Azure file storage, we need a storage account for that one. Then only we can create it. Next, we have the storage tiering. So Azure storage offer different access tiers. Okay, we have different kind of access requirement in our environment. So what it happens, it allow you to store blob object data in the most cost effective manner. So it's all based on the requirement how you want to access your data. If you want frequently accessed, okay, so in this case what you will use hot storage tiering. In this case it is bit costly in comparison to others too. When we will talk about the cool storage tiering, that means that it is optimized for storing data that is infrequently accessed, not immediately, not frequently, and but it should need to be stored at least 30 days. So there is requirement this data need to be stored for 30 days. In the last we have the archive, that is mainly used for archiving purpose, where we know not required to access data frequently, or we can say the backup purpose we can use it, but there is requirement it need to be stored at least 180 days. So if we will talk about the hot one, that where we access the data frequently, or we can say so often. In the cool we don't access the data infrequently, and it require at least it should stay, we store this data for 30 days. For archiving we can't access this data immediately, okay, and it is used for backup purpose and all. So this is what we had in storage. Now we will talk about some database services. So first we have the Azure Cosmos DB. So Azure Cosmos DB is fully managed NoSQL database for modern app development. See, there are database which is relational, or we can say non-relational also. So we can have two kinds of database, okay. So this is known as NoSQL database. That means it is not relational, okay, not relational. That means that you are not logged into a schema for your data. Whenever we talk about the relational database, that means we are storing our data into tables. So where we can use some specific schema, and where we can use one data is related to other data. So there are four kinds of NoSQL database systems, that is key value, column, document, and graph. Just it is for your information. Normally we don't get questions from this one. We will get like we require a NoSQL database that is fully managed, something like that. So in that case we will use Azure Cosmos DB. Let's talk about next, that is Azure SQL database. Yes, you will definitely get one or two questions from this one. So to understand that one, Azure SQL database is a PaaS offering, that is platform as a service offering for SQL Server database hosting. Also in this case what happens, Microsoft manages the platform, so you no need to worry about your database and the data in it. So Microsoft manages the platform here, as it is platform as a service. And this is known as relational database, that is made up of tables of data. When I'm saying the relational database and it is stored in tables, suppose you are inserting the details of some candidates, okay, so you can have his employee number, or you can have his name, you can have his contact detail, and also these are detail related to particular candidate. Similarly we can have the details of employees as well. So wherever we require such kind of details, we use tables, right? That means we are using relational database in that case. So next we have Azure database for MySQL. So if we will talk about Azure data for MySQL, it is easy to set up, operate, and scale. Also we enjoy the advanced security and high availability, that is 99.99. That is maximum what Azure provides for any service. And we have a choice of single zone or zone redundant high availability. That means we can have the choice, either we can keep our database into one particular zone, or we can have multiple zone. That is based on our applications requirement. If you let me share some tips about the exam. Okay, so they can ask like Azure database for MySQL secures your data at rest and as well as in motion. So they can ask in this way. Next we have Azure database for PostgreSQL. So it is also a relational and open source database system. So normally if I'll talk about the PostgreSQL, okay, it was initially designed to run only on Unix and Linux, but now it is available for Mac OS as well, Linux, that is already there, and also we can run this one on Windows as well. So Azure database for PostgreSQL is a managed version of PostgreSQL in Azure. So, as we already talked about Azure database for MySQL, right? So similarly, Azure SQL database for Postgre allows us to utilize a powerful database system without having to manage the server database security, performance, and other administrative tasks. That means it is also a platform as a service offering. Here everything is done by the cloud service provider. Next topic. This is the last topic of this particular domain. So what we have, the Azure Marketplace. See, an Azure Marketplace is an online catalog that contains thousands of applications and services designed and optimized to run on Microsoft Azure public cloud. So who is responsible for these services and all? Microsoft and its technology partners are responsible for developing the products and services you find it in Azure Marketplace. See, we have already learned about many of the products and the services available in Azure, but there are many available products which is also outside what we have discussed here. So that is not only Microsoft offer many additional services, but third-party vendors also provide a variety of services that can help you while building or configuring your environment with Azure. So there are some third-party tools as well. How you can access those tools, which is not part of Azure, we access those tools and services through the Azure Marketplace. So first we have what is Azure IoT. So before understand what exactly the Azure IoT is, let's understand the term IoT. What exactly the IoT is? IoT is a general term that refers to a system of interrelated and internet connected objects. As now you know that there are many smart devices available, either if you go with the Google inbuilt Siri, or you have the Alexa. Might be you heard of these things, right? So these are the smart devices. These are built on IoT only. So these are interrelated and interconnected devices, but these devices are able to collect and transfer data over a wireless network, and we don't require any human intervention to collect and transfer the data. It can be done by these devices. So these are the devices, are the IoT devices. Okay, now let's talk about the Azure IoT. Azure IoT is a collection of managed and platform services across edge and cloud that connect, monitor, and control billions of IoT assets. Where they are talking about the IoT assets, these are the smart devices which we already discussed about. Okay, so that Azure IoT includes security and operating systems for the devices and the equipment. That means it's a talk about everything. Means when we are talking about Azure IoT, it's a collection of managed and platform services. That means it includes the security, it includes the operating system of these devices, also with data and the analytics that helps our business to build or deploy, or we can say manage IoT application. So this is what we have here about the Azure IoT. So let's talk about the components. There are three components belong to Azure IoT. First is things, then is insight, then is access. So what are the things actually? Things are physical objects. That means the smart devices such as industrial equipment, devices, or sensors that connect to the cloud persistently or immediately. Okay, so whatever devices we have, suppose we have Alexa. Okay, so this is the smart device that connects to the cloud here. Okay, it is capable to send data and receive the data from the cloud. So this is the device that connects to the cloud. Okay, what after this we have insight. That means information collected by the things. It collects the information which is analyzed and turned into actionable knowledge either by people or AI. Either it will use the AI or the people. Whoever gives the command, it will receive that command and accordingly it will react. React in the sense it will take action. The way people respond to those insights and connect them to their business as well as systems and tool they use. So on the basis of information people give to these smart devices, these devices will take the action. So this is all about the Azure IoT. Let's see. But here in Azure we have Azure IoT Hub. So what is exactly the Azure IoT Hub? Azure IoT Hub is a managed service for bi-directional communication between IoT devices and Azure. As I told, suppose this is our smart device, and here we have Azure Cloud. So Azure IoT Hub is a managed service for this bi-directional connection between the Azure and the IoT devices. This Azure IoT Hub provides a cloud hosted solution backend to connect virtually any devices. So it will help us to prepare or build a solution, or it's known as a backend solution for these devices through which this devices connects. So from IoT Hub, we can send a message to the devices. From this IoT Hub, we can send the messages. Also, we can receive the messages from the smart devices. So when we are talking about Azure IoT Hub, it also follows some protocols. What are those protocols? It can HTTPS, AMQP, AMQP over WebSockets. Then we have MQTT, and in the last we have MQTT over WebSockets. Why I'm writing here, you can also follow the Azure website where you will get it, but sometimes we can get these questions that what are the protocol Azure IoT hubs follow. So you should remember these things. Also, it is having some SLA as well. So Azure IoT hubs provide SLA of 99.9%. So this is the SLA, and there is some quota limit as well. The current limit is 50 IoT hub per Azure subscription. 15 IoT hub per subscription. That means within a subscription, we can create up to 50 IoT hubs. Let's talk about next topic, Azure IoT Central. So IoT Central is a IoT application platform that reduces the burden and cost of developing, managing, and maintaining enterprise grade IoT solutions. So it helps us to prepare the IoT solutions. See, more things need to understand. This is the SaaS offering, that means software as a service offering. Like we have seen the IoT Hub. Here, we don't have to create any Azure resources to use IoT Central. In IoT Hub, we require some resources to create IoT Hub, but here we can directly access this IoT Central through browser. So if we want to summarize this Azure IoT Central, that is a fully managed global IoT SaaS services or SaaS solution that make it easy to connect, monitor, and manage our IoT assets. Okay, Azure IoT Central is highly secure scale, that means it is enterprise grade, and it's a predictable pricing and industry focus. So these are the key features about the IoT Central. What are those? Highly secure, enterprise grade, predictable pricing, and industry focus. The SLA for this one is same like IoT Hub, we have 99.9%. And accessibility, like we can access Azure IoT Central using desktop, tablets, or any devices which supports browsers. So even from the mobiles also we can use the Azure IoT Central component. Let's talk about the next service, that is Azure Sphere. Azure Sphere is a secured high-level application platform with built-in communication and security feature for internet-connected devices. So it is a secured high-level application platform which has inbuilt communication and security feature for the internet-connected devices. That means they are talking about the IoT devices here. What does that mean? That you know that IoT devices are similarly to the computing device, okay, that runs software that's designed for a specific purpose, right? So if any device that is running through the software, so there are high chances that there can be a bug. So IoT devices are not different from the normal computing devices. So we have many advantages of these devices, but there are a few disadvantages as well. What are those? The hackers can get access or control to these devices if we have some loopholes in it. So for that purpose, so there are many security risks, right, with using these smart devices, because it is connected through the internet. Sometimes it might be possible that hacker can have control on our communication what we are having from the Azure devices to the cloud. So they can control these devices as well. To address these security issues, Microsoft developed this Azure Sphere. I hope now it is clear to you. It is for the security purpose that reduce the security risk for the IoT devices. So whenever they will talk about the security of IoT devices, we need to choose Azure Sphere whenever they will ask in the question. Let's talk about next service, that is Azure Synapse Analytics. If we will talk about in general, Azure Synapse Analytics is a limitless analytics service that brings together data integration, enterprise data warehousing, and big data analytics. So what Azure Synapse Analytics do, it gives us the freedom to query data on our terms. Either we want to run this on serverless or on dedicated resources. It's our choice, whatever we want to use it. Azure Synapse run in an Azure Synapse cluster. A cluster is a combination of 4 different components. What are these components? Because it can be asked in the exam that what are the components belong to Azure Synapse Analytics. Then the components are Synapse SQL, Apache Spark integration, data integration of Spark and Azure Data Lake storage, and the fourth component is a web-based user interface called Azure Synapse Studio. So the interface which is given by the Azure for this particular Azure Synapse Analytics, that is known as Azure Synapse Studio. So you need to remember this thing as well. Let's talk about next service, HD Insight. So HD Insight makes it possible to easily create and manage clusters of computers on a common framework designed to perform distributed processing of big data. In short, if we will talk about HD Insight, it processes massive amount of data with managed cluster of Hadoop cluster in the cloud. So HD Insight is a Microsoft managed service. Okay, it is provided by Microsoft. It's a Microsoft managed service that provides a cloud-based implementation of a popular data analytics platform like Hadoop. In general, we have Hadoop who do this uh, data analytics at larger scale. So from the Microsoft side, it's a HD Insight. So Hadoop is the another form of HD Insight. So an HD Insight cluster performs analytics by breaking up large data blocks into segments that are then handed off to nodes within the cluster. So what it do, it if you have large data block, okay. So HD Insight breaks the data into blocks segments, and then it is sent. Suppose we have the cluster, okay, Hadoop cluster, that is the master node we have. Then we have the node, worker node kind of. So what it do, HD Insight, it breaks this data into small blocks, data blocks we can say, and these segments sent to this one for the processing of these data. This is what the task of HD Insight. I hope it is clear to you. If we will talk about the exam perspective, you need to understand what actually it do and what are the function of this HD Insight. We no need to go in much detail about these services. We just need to understand what are the function it do in perspective to this AZ-900 exam. Let's talk about next. Now we will talk about the Azure Databricks. What it do? Azure Databricks integrate collaborative Apache Spark based analytics service with other big data services in Azure. I remember that there was one question where it was asked that which is true or false, that where they will talk about the Apache Storm, not the Apache Spark. So whenever we need to think about the Databricks, that is Apache Spark. Now understand what happens in Azure Databricks and how it helps. So normally you know that we have for data analytics, we store data in data warehouse or data lakes. So whatever data we store in these two places, which is used for analytics purpose, it's often unstructured or that is difficult to consume. That means we are having the raw data in this storage, and there might be possible or that's a need that we store this data, or we can say the collect these data from multiple sources. We can have multiple sources to get these data and store in these stored devices, or we can say the stored services. Then Azure Databricks is ideal solution for accumulating these data, whatever data we are gathering inside these resources. So Azure Databricks, what it do, it's an ideal solution for accumulating these data and for forming the data, so it can be used optimally for machine learning models. Okay, so whatever data we are getting here, it will accumulate that data, makes it sensible, then we can use that particular data in machine learning module, so the modules can learn from the data what we stored or we gathered through these services. And these data, whatever is stored in this data warehouse or data lakes, are raw and unstructured. I hope it is clear to you. Let's see the next service what we have. Azure Machine Learning Service. We will talk about in one line. Azure Machine Learning Service is a platform for making predictions. It's normally used to make predictions. It consists of tools and services that allow you to connect to data to train and test models to find one that will most accurately predict a future result. On the basis of current situation, we need to predict the future result out of any data. So in this case, what happens? So it's like a platform which use the test data, and it will create one module that will be used for predict the future results. That is what we have in machine learning. In general, if we will talk about the cloud perspective, it's a cloud-based environment which can help us to develop, train, test, deploy, manage, and track machine learning model. So it's a cloud-based solution, or we can say cloud-based environment. If we will talk about the editions, we have two editions available for this one. One is basic, another is enterprise. In the basic edition, it offers only to access machine learning software development keys and notebooks. What it offers? Machine learning SDK, that is software development keys and notebooks. And this enterprise edition offers the features of basic edition. Also, it adds many additional features, including visual designers. So in this one, we can visually design these modules as well. So normally what we can do with the Azure machine learning, so we can create a process that can define how we can obtain data, how we can handle the missing data, how we can split the data into a training sets or trainer sets or test set, what we use for this one, these models. Also we can train and evaluate predictive models by using tools and programming languages. Here we use the high level programming language, those are Python and R. We can also deploy the best performing algorithm as an application programming interface, that is API. So these are the things we can do with the Azure machine learning. I hope it is clear, and I know that this is enough for the exam level. We need to understand that Azure machine learning service is used for prediction, to make any prediction. How we can make the prediction? For that we require the test data, or we can say training data. Let's talk about next service. Next service we have cognitive service. Azure Cognitive Services provides pre-built machine learning model that enables applications to see, hear, speak, understand, and even begin to reason. Also, cognitive service brings AI within the reach of every developer without requiring or without knowledge of machine learning expertise. So this is normally a very good service, we can say. Now the thing is, what Azure Cognitive Service can help. So it helps to solve general problem like analyzing text from the emotional statements, we can say, or emotional sentiments, or it can helpful for analyzing the images to recognize objects or faces in the image. So this service can be used for that purpose. So how it is different from the Azure machine learning? In Azure machine learning, what we need to bring our own data, then we will create the trained models over that data. But in Azure Cognitive Service, in most of the cases, it provides pre-trained models, so we no need to bring our own data and to get prediction. We can do the prediction on the live data. So now we will talk about the categories within Azure Cognitive Service. We have 4 categories: language service, speech service, vision service, decision service. Let's talk about one by one. If we will talk about the language service, it's allow us, or we can say it's allow our application to process natural language with pre-built scripts. If we'll talk about the speech service, that converts your text into natural sound speech. If we'll talk about the vision service, it helps to add recognition and identification capabilities whenever we need to analyze pictures, videos, and or other visual content. So it helps to analyze the object within from those data. In the last, we have the decision service. Decision service add personalized recommendation for each user that automatically improve each time they are used. It also helps to moderate content to monitor and remove offensive or risky content. Let's talk about next service, Azure Bot Service. What is Azure Bot Service? It's a platform for creating virtual agent that understand and reply to questions just like a human. As you know, right now we have many solution available in the market. Whenever you access any web page, there is suddenly one pop-up came, how may I help you? That pop-up is just a kind of work like an agent, which is having some specific question and answer inbuilt there. Whatever you will ask, they have the predefined answer for that one, and they will that can be used to gather the information from the client or from the customers. Normally we use for that purpose, but it analyze few things as well, like it will understand your behavior, what kind of question you will put, it understand everything. So it uses AI, artificial intelligence, and it will check your question accordingly, it will answer you. So Azure Bot Service is a bit different from Azure machine learning and Azure Cognitive Service in that it has a specific use case. Okay, so Azure Bot Service, what it do, it provides integrated environment that is purpose built for bot development. So what are those bot is? Normally if we will talk about the bot itself, it provides an experience that feels like we are using computer and more like it's dealing with the persons, and at least an intelligent robot, we can say. Whenever we interact with those pop-ups, we understand, okay, whatever we will ask, they will be able to answer us. So that is the Azure Bot Service. It's like a robot kind of that will answer it. So human interaction kind of things. For that purpose, we have the Azure Bot Service. It uses the, in perspective to the exam, we need to understand that Azure Bot Service run on Azure App Service. So what are the things we require for Azure Bot Service? Artificial intelligence, cognitive service, Azure App Service. These are the required component for Azure Bot Service. So when if we will talk about in terms of cost, whenever we run the Azure Bot Service, we are dealing with the Azure App Service, so we have to pay cost for this as well. Now we have the serverless. What exactly the serverless is? Serverless refers to a deployment model in which users are responsible for only their application code and configuration. That means that we are not worried about the underlying infrastructure. That serverless does not mean that there are no servers. Yes, that I already explained to you. But the thing is, to understand more about it, to run any code, in general, we require some infrastructure. Means we require compute, we require storage, we require network to run. But however, here it is not visible to the customers. We are not. That means it is running on that one, but we just need to concentrate on our application code and the configuration. Whenever it needs, we will execute that code, and our function or the logic will run on that one. If we will talk about the serverless, we have two things. One is Azure function, and we have logic apps. These are the two services offered by Azure, Azure function and logic apps. Let's see both of them one by one. Azure function, as I mentioned, Azure function is an event driven serverless compute service. So it's a compute component. Whenever we talk about the compute resources in any cloud provider, so serverless, this Azure function, in Azure we have Azure function, in AWS we have AWS Lambda, in Oracle Cloud we have Oracle function. So these all comes under compute resources. That means that we can use these functions to write codes, having to, and we no need to worry about the underlying infrastructure. We just need to focus on creating the code and the configuration part. Now the thing is how we can create these functions. Okay, so in Azure we have Microsoft Visual Studio, Visual Studio Code, Java function apps, Python command line for Python function apps. We have Azure command line interface as well on Windows and Linux, and we have the Azure portal as well, from where we can create our Azure function, or we can say the function app, whatever this Azure function use, are serverless, but it also run on Azure app service. But sometimes what happens, you need to you want to create your own infrastructure, this service. On top of that, you want to configure your function. In that case, you need to pay for this Azure app service. In general, we no need to pay for this one. Let's talk about second serverless service, that is logic apps. Logic apps is a serverless workflow offering from Azure. Logic apps help us to build a business process and workflow solution with easy using the Azure portal. So here we no need to write anything. It's like working as a workflow model. We just need to create the workflow, and we need to define the events out of that, after which event which action need to be taken care on the basis of logics. So this is event driven. Means once one event is occurred, then the action will be taken care. So we need to inbuilt the logic there in the workflow. Accordingly, it will trigger. Now let's talk about next service. Here we will talk about the Azure DevOps service. Azure DevOps is a software as a service platform from Microsoft that provides an end-to-end DevOps toolchain for developing and deploying software. See, if you will talk about the DevOps itself, Dev is for developer, Ops is for operations. So it is for the guys who is having the knowledge of development as well as the operations. If we will talk about more about Azure DevOps, Azure DevOps provides developer services for support teams to plan work, collaborate on code development, and build and deploy the application. So here, in as a DevOps engineer, we plan the code, we prepare the code, we need to deploy the code, as well as we need to manage that code. So everything need to be done by these DevOps engineer. So normally Azure DevOps is made up of multiple services. What are those services in Azure? We have Azure Board, Azure Repos, Azure Pipelines, Azure Test Plans, Azure Artifacts. I saw few questions out of these. Okay, so let's see what we have. If we will talk about the Azure Boards, Azure Boards is a visual way to manage and track work for your team. Okay, it's a visual dashboard kind of. Next we have Azure Repos, that is source and version control. So for versioning we use this Azure Repo. I saw one question from this, so you can expect. Azure Pipelines, it's used to manage software releases through build, test, and release automation. So for build, test, and release automation. Next we have Azure Test Plans, which is used to create and track tests. So it is used for create and track test which need to be performed to ensure reliable software release. In the last we have Azure Artifacts. Azure Artifact. Okay, so it uses popular feeds from both public and private sources. Let's talk about next service, that is Azure DevTest Labs. Azure DevTest Labs helps quickly create on-demand Windows and Linux environment to test or demo application directly from the deployment pipeline. So DevTest Labs creates lab consisting of pre-configured bases or ARM templates. That means if you need to create, suppose for testing purpose, you require some number of resources like 20 virtual machine you need to create every week. Okay, for every week for testing your application. So in this case, we use Azure DevTest Labs, and you will definitely get questions from this particular topic. Whenever they ask like 20 machine you need to create, 30 machine or 50 machine you need to create every week. So in this case, we will use Azure DevTest Labs. In the last, we have quiz. Let's see. This is the simple quiz which I taken from the Azure learning portal. Let's go through these questions just to brush up our concept if we are good or not. You need to predict future behavior based on previous action. Which product option should you select as a candidate? So which component we have? Azure Machine Learning, Azure Bot Service, or Azure Cognitive Service. So in this case, we have Azure Machine Learning that use previous action on the basis of it you to learn. So here our answer is Azure Machine Learning. Let's talk about next. You need to create a human computer interface that uses natural language to answer customer question. Which product option should you select as a service? Azure Machine Learning, Cognitive Service, or Azure Bot Service? So we know that for human interaction we use Azure Bot Service. In the last, you need to identify for content of product images to automatically create all tags for images formatted properly. Which product option is the best candidate? In this case, we have the option machine learning, cognitive service, or bot service. So the answer for this one is Azure Cognitive Service, that is used for recognition. As we already see, there are 4 services involved, right? Speech, and we have vision. So this is here they are talking about for images. We need to visualize it. So here we have the answer Azure Cognitive Service. So that's it we have in this video. Thank you for watching. See you in next video. I hope you like this video. If you like it, then click on like button, subscribe to this channel for more related content in future. Thank you very much for watching. See you in next video.